In my last video, I created a free-to-play PK peer from scratch strictly via free-to-play. Now the peer I created was a rune warhammer peer, and this is due to its dominance in lower combat brackets. After creating the peer and guide, I wanted to undertake a minimal 100 fights. Now this was to see how the account fared while PKing, and if its starting GP was sufficient to facilitate this. So in this video, I'll be showcasing a data-driven review of those findings and my PK lessons learned along the way. Some starting metrics include just over 1 million GP for gear and supplies, as well as a starting combat level of 29, composed from 44 strength, 40 range, 38 hit points, and 25 magic. I do need to start by sharing a small blunder. As you may or may not know, your default attack player option is set to depend on combat level. Now make sure to change this to left click where available, or you'll also have to right click your opponent to fight them, and this will make for a much smoother first fight. As well, the first time you equip a rune warhammer, it will default to pound, which is an attack training style, so make sure it's been switched to pummel so you do not gain any attack experience. Oh my gosh. But if avoidable events do take place, do not worry, as this will not affect your combat level. So this was my first time PKing on a rune warhammer peer. Now the warhammer has gone through an equipment rework, previously requiring an attack level to wield, but now only requiring strength levels. This rework also created a need for me to understand what could/would be my max hit. I have touched on max hits in previous videos. As well, there has been many comments on those videos on the importance of learning them. I will share though that advice has fallen on deaf ears, as it has been important for me to know my max hit, but I would say it's even more important in knowing my opponents, and that's what I neglected to learn. And with 95% of my opponents having a rune warhammer, I could no longer kick that can down the road. So why learn your opponent's max hit? Well, first and foremost, by knowing your opponent's max hit, you're no longer put in situations thinking, maybe I should eat, but knowing I have to eat. Being the same combat level does not mean you have the same combat stats. That will greatly range. By understanding your opponent's max hit, you're reducing unnecessary deaths. Not being in a position to be taken off guard, but being in a position to better manage risk. Equally knowing when you can risk your health to try and better KO your opponent. This advantage can be gained when playing on the rune-like client. At the start of a fight, you can quickly right-click and look up your opponent's stats. At that point, I would then look down at my max hit cheat sheet. I have yet to memorize max hits, nor would I expect you to. However, having this sheet out whenever you're PKing is a great point of reference. My reference sheet also takes into account the boosted levels gained by drinking a strength potion, as that will vary depending on someone's strength level. But that variation can play into them having an extra max hit or not. If you do want to look into max hits in greater detail for yourself, just simply type OSRS Max Hit Calculator in Google and you can play around with some of the ones that are there. And I would stress for you to begin applying this lesson right away and not neglect applying it as I did. I also want to point out here why free-to-play PKing is such a great place to build fundamental PK concepts. Something as simple as the max hit is really not such a simple thing. In the free-to-play PK community, the weapon pool is at a much smaller scale, as well as the way you boost your combat stats, compared to its pay-to-play counterparts, making it a solid place to build on that entry-level concept. Now, as far as the 100 fights and their outcomes, I would say it would be best to hear these findings and some lessons learned from the peer's point of view. That being said, P.O.V, my first 100 fights on my free-to-play peer, built from scratch strictly via free-to-play. Excuse me, that's the wrong cow field. You would think after killing 3,213 cows, you would get some respect around here. I guess to introduce myself, I am a peer made from scratch in free-to-play, and I trained roughly 25 hours actually, most of it in this field that we're filming this in here. Now, as far as that Siisu character goes and his learning to PK journey, I slot in at the fight bracket of 6 to 700. Now, the 100 fights themselves, they resulted in the following outcomes: 26 kills, 34 deaths, and 40 fights ending in a player running. myself only accounting for 8 of those runs. Now, my kill to death ratio was 1 to 1.3, not great, but not as bad as when Siisu first started PKing. That guy, he's a bit of a purist, hence me being free to play only, but I know the whole time I'm training, there's this other peer, a pay to play rendition, that's being trained too. The guy thinks that'll be what turns his KD ratio positive, using something like an optimal account. But if you ask me about being optimal, I would say definitely is a weighted factor. But you want to know what also is a weighted factor? When you come home from work and skill instead of PK. That's right, the man was training construction for the amount of planking that took place some nights. Oh, that was such a dumb death. I guess I'm done. Straight up, who dies to an arrow in 2021? Yeah, I had to deal with that. Now, 40 of the fights did not finish and ended with the player running, which is interesting to note as it was the largest sum of fights ending that way in any of the fight brackets to date. Dude can't finish. Wait, pardon? Can't finish? No, I can finish, man. I have no problems with finishing. PK wise, the only thing that changed was the adding in of this hammer, and when it does hit, it hits. But you got to take into account that you have very low attack levels now and much lower accuracy, and that was definitely a factor in fights being less decisive. I even got to chat with some other PKers who have opted to gain attack levels, and they shared it's made a difference, and there will be a point where it does become optional, but I'll let Siisu explain that as I'm getting nothing but disrespect here again, and I'm out. Alright guys, so the 100 fights equated to roughly 13 hours of gameplay and took place over a few weeks in my evenings after work. I started PKing at a combat level of 29, but ended with a combat level of 36, composed of 45 strength, 51 range, 26 magic, and 45 hit points. It should be noted that my range max hit increased from 7 to 9, however my strength max hit remained the same. Now at the onset of this video, my count was melee based, but that has since shifted to range based. In respect to this and my findings from the 100 fights so far, I decided to complete the quest Vampire Slayer. Now this is the only free-to-play quest that gives combat experience to a 1 defense peer with minimal hit points experience gained. Now the quest reward gave me 20 attack, and this was done to increase my accuracy. Additionally, noting my current strength level, I quickly trained it to level 46, as this will increase my boosted max hit from 13 to 14. Now these changes only took a total gameplay of 20 minutes. Now there may be a point where I have to bite the bullet and train strength outside of PKing, but that's something that will be gauged. And I would advise you as well to be monitoring your stats and their impact on your combat level, as the changes I quickly made here were accomplished without affecting my current combat level of 36. As far as spending money on gear and supplies, I quickly subbed out tuna and lobsters for lobsters and swordfish, as the max hits were much higher than expected. As well, the 1 million starting GP was sufficient to facilitate the 100 fights, but with my kills being at a deficit to my deaths, this would run out. Also noting that this deficit was much greater in my original first 100 fights. Because of this, I wanted to include a quick free-to-play moneymaker to help fuel your efforts while going through the Crucible learning curve. In the event you've almost exhausted your funds, a great moneymaker is creating dyes in Draenor. Now this is done by speaking to Aggie. Now the material to create these colored dyes does vary. I personally created the orange dyes, and in 20 minutes I turned 20k into 60k, equating to roughly 120k profit per hour. Let's say you wanted something less click intensive and easier to AFK to. You could also create pastry doughs and subsequently create pie shells with them at the Grand Exchange. This was something I did in the evenings as well. Now this moneymaker does require more starting GP, but my guide very much allowed you to do this as there was reserve funds. The starting material cost me roughly 192k, and I was able to sell this for just under 440k, being a rough 250k profit in under 2 hours. Also, I would advise you not to insta-sell your items, instead to leave them in overnight to maximize profit. I hope this video has been enjoyable to watch, but more so helpful to anyone who's followed my previous guide and those learning to PK themselves. Now if that's you and you're learning to PK, make sure to share your progress in the comments below. Also, I have created another rune warhammer pier from scratch, but this time strictly via pay to play, and I will be releasing another step-by-step guide, as well as an additional video like this one on my finding on that account's first 100 fights. I'm not wanting to spoil anything, so if you are curious on what those findings will be, make sure to be subscribed. And lastly, I do have a special video project that will be releasing prior to those free-to-play videos. Now I share this, guys, as there's a lot of exciting things in the works right now, and with all that being said, I will see you next time.